Welcome to Why I Left, a podcast that explores the Great Resignation. I'm your host, Brian Aquart. Join me as I chronicle real stories from real people about the reasons they decided to leave their jobs during the pandemic and what has happened since. Hello, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Why I Left. In today's episode, I chat with Shara Hutchinson. Shara made a promise to bet on herself and took the leap to become a full-time entrepreneur. She's now the CEO of Xposeyour, a company founded on the principles that being exposed to people, experiences, and information leads to change, growth, and success. Let's go check out her story. All right, welcome back. Our guest today is Shara Hutchinson. In addition to being the CEO of Xposeyour, Shara is the founder of the I Still Want to Be a Mom Foundation, author of Barefoot in the Boardroom, and I Still Want to Be a Mom. She's also a TEDx speaker. Now, she leads with empathy and has over 17 years of leadership experience developing and implementing operational strategies and technologies that creatively enhance the customer experience while supporting key business initiatives. Whether in life or in business, she's passionate about helping others, and it really shows. She posted a great video of a conversation that she had with her future self on LinkedIn that really caught my attention and one of my former guests shared with me. I really loved the creativity and I'm excited to have her with us. So hi, Shara. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So prior to us, getting into your leap, right? And that'll be the theme of today. But tell us a little bit about, your upbringing and where you currently call home.
My upbringing, I actually was a foster child. So by the time I was 12, I had lived in 5 different homes. And I was actually homeless at 13. I met my biological father and he was on drugs. And then I ended up getting with another family and things turned around for me. And on one hand, I was exposed to negativity and drugs and alcohol. And then I got a chance to be exposed to a different type of life and my life changed. And so I ended up going to college, getting a job, working my way up into senior leadership. And now I'm working for myself.
Oh, that's awesome. And so what are some of the things that you've been passionate about when it comes to what you've done in your work life?
I've always been passionate about a few things. Number one, helping people, right? Helping people find what their unique gifts are. Growing up the way that I did, I always felt kind of like the outcast. And it made me feel as if like, I need to have this skill or I need to have that like somebody else. And somewhere along the lines, I learned that I have my own unique gifts and my own unique skills. And if I could tap into those, I could do exponential things, right? And so I had a desire because I knew how it felt to wrestle with yourself to help other people. So that's one of the things that's important to me. Also, a desire to work cohesively as a team. So with everybody having their own unique skills, gifts, and talents, sometimes it's easy when you have a different gift or a different skill, right? To look at somebody else and say, you should be doing things like me. And in the corporate world, sometimes, we don't always work well as teams, like just throughout the years, just working with various companies, not any particular company, but just like seeing it and talking to friends. And one of the keys is if everybody stays in their lane and knows what their lane is and appreciates other people, I think you have better results. And so I also desire to help teams work better. And so those are the things that I'm passionate about. And I'm passionate about family, passionate about my husband, my son. You mentioned earlier about my book, I Still Want to Be a Mom. That was my very first book. And it was written after my 8-year journey with infertility to have my son. And so I'm passionate about my family, passionate about helping people work together, and passionate about helping individuals find their purpose, their unique gifts, and operate in it.
No, definitely. And obviously this show is about kind of the why you left piece, but I do have to share with you that, I read your story and it is for those who are listening now, it is an amazing journey that Shara shares in that fertility journey. And so I appreciate you kind of sharing that with the world, because as I was kind of doing my background on you and everything, that was something that really touched me. So this is not the show for that. So I try not to go down the rabbit hole there, but I would love to talk with you more about that at some pace, because at some space, because there are so many folks who kind of deal with similar things that I think that story would really resonate.
So one thing, Brian, that I'll mention, I actually married those two stories. Like in my book, we'll talk probably about it later, but I actually use my infertility story to share that in business, sometimes you have the right tools, the right people, but you have to do something unconventional to get the result that you want. And so I think life is a part, like you are who you are when you go to work. And so your personal life follows you.
Definitely. And so, prior to launching your own company, talk to us a little bit about, your work journey and really what's worked well in some of the environments that you found yourself a part of.
So I spent about almost 10 years working at a software startup. And when I started there were probably about maybe 25 or 28 employees there. And when I left, there were about maybe 150 or so. The company was growing, 30% year over year. We had acquired 3 different companies. I was leading our service and support department. But if anybody who's listening has worked at a startup, you realize that whatever position you're in, you are wearing like 75 different hats. And I'm actually grateful for that experience because I had the opportunity to interface with every department at the company and make decisions at all levels and see how business works and operates. And so as I was going through that journey, of course, fast growing company, integrating new companies into yours with acquisitions, meaning that we went from 2 products to supporting 12 products, and having to work with different teammates. And throughout that journey, we kept a great culture. We retained most of our staff. Like I said, I was there for almost 10 years, and there were people on my team and throughout the organization that had been there also for years. And I took a step back and thought, like, how did all that work? Usually, because when things change rapidly and you're growing, there's chaos. And there was chaos and it was stressful, but the team worked together, right? And I told you earlier that I'm passionate about just helping people work together better. And we did that well. In the midst of all that, I was going through an 8-year infertility journey, which is why it weaves in, right? And so I had my son after several rounds of IVF. And in 2020, I started getting to the place where I felt overwhelmed. And I'm like, the software company that I was working at, I was on call 24/7. And so going from working for years, being excited about being on call, being excited about, what's the next thing that we're going to solve, to like, now I'm a mom, right? And I want to sleep at night, and I don't want to be on call all evening and missing out on time with him. And so I started to feel different, I'll say. And I was like, I need to do something different. So in 2020 is when I actually started my company, Xposeyour, but I didn't leave the workforce, right? Then I thought I was going to. So I started my company. I was like, I'm just going to leave and I'm going to work on my own. We were in the middle of a pandemic. And so I'm like, maybe I'm not going to do that right now. And so I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get another job. While I built my business, and then I'll leave and be on my own full time. So I got a job at Coda. And the reason why I chose Coda is because they're doing such great work in the community. And so I felt like, wow, like I can have an impact in the community. They were also in the process of getting ready to roll out a mobile app to users to be able to digitize cash. And me coming from the software world, I was like, I get the opportunity to help build another team and technology and like fast pace, but not be on call 24/7. So I was like, oh, this is perfect. And so I got the job there. My role was actually the first role there for customer experience. And so I led their customer experience department. And while I was there, again, I had already started my company, and I already had this feeling like, at some point, I'm going to leave and be on my own.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are listening, what is CODA?
The Central Ohio Transit Authority. So the bus transportation, they're more than that. But I mean, I guess for the listeners, they may be more familiar with our buses, but Coda is definitely more than that. They are mobility solutions, all throughout Central Ohio.
Oh, very nice. And so that's actually a perfect transition into, I want to take you back into the COVID time, right? So March 2020, we're really introduced to the pandemic as we now know it. And so talk a little bit about how the pandemic affected you.
Whew. So he was 2 at the time. So after going through 8 years to even conceive and carry a child, had him, I'm working, I'm on call 24/7. And there were some businesses that slowed down through the pandemic. Technology, maybe not so much. I don't know about all the technology companies, but ours, where I was working at, they didn't. There was not less work. There was not less demand. There was not less anything. However, there was less daycare, right? Because the schools and daycare shut down. And so here I was with, my husband also works at a software company. So he and I were working both all day. And our son was there, 2 years old, running around, jumping off of couches, screaming. And I started to feel overwhelmed. I think the pandemic and having him home all day and still working, number one, it did one thing for me. I realized I don't have to do everything, because at some point I'm like, I need to work and I got to lead my team and I have my son here. And I was overwhelmed, and I usually don't get overwhelmed. I can take on a lot, but I was stressed. I was very stressed. So I said, you know what? I don't have to do everything. And I realized at that moment, there are things that I take on that I've taken on myself that no one told me I have to do. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing extra. No, I'm going to do it. So I learned that. I also realized that, okay, and my son wasn't talking. So he was 2 years old. He had no words. And so we were going to we couldn't even go to the speech therapist because they were doing virtual. So then we have these virtual appointments with a 2-year-old who's bouncing off the walls. He doesn't have any words, and they're concerned, like, is he a speech delay and all this stuff. And so I got him into speech therapy. And when we went to when we had the first meeting virtually, they asked me about our routine, and having to recite the fact that, okay, I get up, I work, he's watching TV, he's doing something. Oh, and then by the way, when I'm off, then I get a call, and then I'm still working throughout the evening. And my husband was working a split shift, like 11 to 8, which meant that I was supposed to be off by 5, but there would be times where I would be still working to 8. And so the TV was kind of raising my child, because he was watching a lot of these cartoons. And so he was making noises. But as I was walking through this with the speech therapist, I thought they were going to help him, but they helped me realize I wasn't spending enough time with him. I needed to give him those words. And they were asking me, like, well, do you talk to him about it? And I was like, no. I was like, it's time to get up. He gets dressed and I feed him. It's like, you don't ask him if he's, I was like, no. And I realized he was a part of my life. I wasn't a part of his, right? Like, so it's like, hey, you're in here, you're going to eat at this time, you're going to do this. And so I wasn't giving him the opportunity to speak and say and ask for what he wanted. And that was another thing that I learned throughout the pandemic. So I'm grateful that I was working so much that I was neglecting what was most important. And having that realization helped me to make the decision to start my company before I left in the pandemic.
And so, having this real revelation, how did you now start to then change the way you worked during the shutdowns and really, throughout what you were doing with Coda? How did you change your style?
So one thing was leaving the software company that I was at, because the culture was just, and my role was such that I needed to be on call 24/7, and things happened. And we were supporting critical infrastructure industries like gas, electric, water. And so that's what it was. So first things first, I left. Then I went to Coda for better hours, right? Because I knew I wasn't going to have to be on call, but I would have the same opportunity and challenges and excitement that I had at my old job, which I loved, without the overnight work. And so I did that. Daycares opened back up, which was good. So I was able to get him in a daycare. And then with how I learned to manage myself when I went to Coda, I had clear boundaries, because before I was just working all day and doing extra work. And I think I mentioned a little earlier that there were activities I was doing that no one asked me to do, that I was just doing. And I learned some of that stuff doesn't even matter. Just be effective. And so when I went to Coda, that was my motto. Like, I'm just going to be effective. I'm not doing Not that I didn't go above and beyond there, but I mean, I wasn't doing unnecessary activities. I wanted to be effective and do what was the priority.
Makes sense. And so now looking back at the pandemic, really in its totality, what is one thing that you would have done differently during this time?
Nothing. Nothing. And I say that because I'm a person that believes whatever you go through, whatever you experience, shapes you into who you are. And so if I had done anything different, I wouldn't have learned the things that I've learned. And I feel like I'm in a great space right now. So everything was worth it.
Yeah, I like that. And so look, after being with your last company, you were there for almost 2 years, you decided to take this huge leap in November of 2022, right? So ultimately, why did you leave your job during the pandemic?
So it all started in 2020, really. And it was like a 2-year culmination until one day I realized I had to take the leap, right? And so working at Coda, like I said, I absolutely loved it. I made great connections there. But when you have a big vision on the inside of you, or big purpose, or big goal, if you don't feel that, nothing satisfies it. And so you can do a lot of good things, but if it's not the right thing, you won't feel settled. And so I began to realize that it was time for me to step out and work on my own. And I knew that when I went in August, I believe it was, I went to an event called Be Your Best Self. And one of the speakers was there, and she was talking about how she was working her corporate job, and she knew that the only way to grow her business was to walk away, but she was comfortable with her salary, but she decided to walk away from her job, pursue her business full time, to be with her family. And she felt so much better. And when she said that, it was almost like something jumped in my heart. And I was like, that's me. Like, that's exactly how I feel. And I was like, was I supposed to hear this today? And so then I was at the table with a bunch of strangers. I didn't know anybody there. And I said, I think I need to leave my job. And I said that, and several other people was like, well, just do it. And I was like, but I can't just do it like right now. What do you mean? And so there was a gentleman there who actually has a podcast, and he was there recording for the event, like live testimonials and things like that. Someone told him what I said. And so he actually came up to me and said, all right, I heard that you want to leave your job, but I want you to do something. I want you to record yourself saying that you're going to leave your job. So record a note to your future self. And I want you to give a date. He said, because when you give yourself a date for something that you say you're going to do, you almost feel like you have to keep that promise. So on the spot, he had me record a future note to myself saying I was going to leave. And I said I was going to leave by January 2023, which we're recording now in January, right? How ironic. So I said by the beginning of January, I was going to leave my job. And so he sent me the recording later, and I kept that recording, and I'm still working. And then I was thinking, like, am I really going to leave? like, I know I said this and I said it to myself, but am I going to do this? And as time progressed, it was almost like I made a promise to myself and I'm not keeping it. And I'm like, why put off for tomorrow what you can do today? Most of the time, when we say we're going to do something later, it's because we don't want to do it. And then I was like, well, things are not going to be perfect in January. So it's like, well, there's never a perfect time then. So if there's never a perfect time, why not leave now? Right. And so I began to feel suffocated. And even though I'm going to work every day, something was missing. And I remember one day my son, who's 4 now, he came to me and he was like, Mommy, get off the computer. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he saying that all I do is get on the computer? Because at this time, remember, I had started my business in 2020. So I'm working my job by day. At nighttime, I'm working on deliverables for clients or researching stuff to build my business. And the weekends, I'm working to build my business as well so that I can get to the place where I can leave. And then I started getting like some more speaking engagements and consulting opportunities. And I recognized the only way for me to grow my business is to let the job go. And I was like, if I don't let it go, I'll be pulled in multiple directions. I won't be able to really spend that much time with my son and my husband, and I'm not going to be fulfilling the thing that I think I should be doing anyway.
Look, I love that story. Look, as I mentioned earlier, I saw your LinkedIn video about this move and how you held yourself accountable to actually do it. You talked a little bit about that process and what it was like. But tell us, for those who haven't seen the video, and I'll link to it in our show notes. But tell us about then what, like, the origins of creating this video and creating that content and then putting that out there. What was that like?
Well, I know a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people that have big goals and big dreams and don't always act on it. And from a thought to a decision, in the middle of that, there's conversations you have with yourself. And I sat down and wrote down some of the things that I said to myself throughout that journey. And I felt like, remember earlier I said I like to help people find their purpose themselves. And I was like, if I had this conversation with myself before I could take a leap and do something I knew I wanted to do, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of other people who are having these conversations with themselves and they're waiting for the perfect moment when that perfect moment does not exist. And so I want to create this video and be vulnerable to share, like, you're robbing time from your family for a job and a business. There's nothing wrong with having a job, right? But the moral is, if there's something you want to do, why are you waiting to do it, right? Why are you waiting? And when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, and vice versa. And what do you want most, right? And so I wanted to somehow convey that message to people who watched the video. It wasn't really about me leaving my job per se. It's more about taking a leap and making a decision to do whatever it is that you want to do.
Agreed. And I would take it a step further, like not only doing what you wanted to do, but doing what you said you were going to do.
Yes, yes. Yeah, doing what you said you were going to do, doing what you want to do, said you were going to do, and that you feel like you need to do, because I felt like I had to. It was like something on the inside of me is like, leave. It's like, and I knew that if I left, I would be able to 10x my results. And in 2 months, I've been able to accomplish more than I have, for my business, that is, than in the past 2 years.
Oh, that's great. And so look, so huge impact to finally make that decision. It's a great transition into, tell us a little bit about what happened since you left. Tell us a little more about your company, Xposeyour, as well as your book and podcast called Barefoot in the Boardroom.
Yes. Thank you. So where am I going to start? I will start at the company, right? So I started my company. The name is Xposeyour. And that name is significant. So earlier in our conversation, I mentioned my upbringing, being in foster care and being in various homes, being homeless as a teenager, and then moving with other families and having being exposed to different information. And when I was thinking about the name for my company, I chose the name Xposeyour because of that reason. Growing up, everything that changed my life had to do with exposure. So whether I was exposed to something negative and my life was going in a negative direction, or exposed to something positive, it changed. And then in business, in my career, as I was exposed to new information, I learned more and more and more. And so I was like, that's the key. What you're exposed to determines where you go in life. And so I decided to name my company Xposeyour. And ironically, I was already, prior to going to Coda, I was writing my book, Barefoot in the Boardroom. And originally I was thinking that it was like leadership strategy. And I came up with this thing called the Barefoot Method, based off of all of my experience throughout the years of leading with rapid growth and different things like that going on. And when I went to Coda, the very first thing they had me do was take, not just me, but various leaders. We were certified in change management. And as we were going through the certification, I looked at the materials that I had already written for my book. And I was like, wait a minute. So I do change management. And so it was almost like I was able to define what it was that I do, not just leadership strategy. And it gave me clarity on that. And so I started shaping and framing my messages and everything around not just leadership strategy, but also organizational change management. And throughout that process, finished my book up, published it, released it. And then when I left, well, again, prior to me leaving, I was getting, opportunities for speaking and for training and for consulting. And so after leaving, starting like November 1st, went to several events, tapped into my network, and I've had, several other speaking engagements. I've had several other consulting opportunities with clients that I'm working with now for on a contract basis. And I was able to actually form several relationships with opportunities that are going to close this year. So like that last 2 months was critical. I've got like 6 or 7 opportunities in the pipeline that will likely close this year, that having that time throughout the day to build those relationships, have those conversations, do those presentations has allowed me to have those doors open for me.
That's amazing. And congratulations to
Thank
you.
you.
So when you look at this whole process, what have you learned about yourself?
That I'm unstoppable. I've learned that when I want something, I go get it. I've learned whether it is wanting a child and going for 8 years, right, and keep getting knocked down to have him, or wanting to grow my business and making the decision to jump out there regardless of with the uncertainty. That's what I'll say. Regardless of the uncertainty, to still jump out there and do it and chase what I want. I learned that I am not satisfied unless I'm staying true to me. And so I'm more interested in results than recognition. I'm more interested in following purpose than getting a profit, right? And so, like, as long as I stay true to myself, I have inner peace. And when I have inner peace, I'm unstoppable. I can get anything done. I can learn anything. I can do anything. And there's no challenge that's too great.
Oh, I love that. And now, one of the pieces of the show that I personally love and the listeners love too is really getting advice for the folks that we have come on. And so, for people who might want to take their own leap into entrepreneurship, what are your top 3 pieces of advice for them to get started?
Good question. Top 3 pieces of advice. I would say number 1, find the one thing that you should do. Sometimes we as people, we want to look for something new, right? We want some new instruction. We want new information. We want, somebody to give us some new shiny object that we can use. But really, we have what we need already in us. And it's usually one thing that we have to do, right? Whether that one thing is using the information you already have, right? Whether that one thing is finding out what you need and asking for help, right? Like whatever that one thing is, I think find the one thing that you're avoiding and do that, because everybody knows something that we're avoiding. Like I was avoiding leaving the job, even though I knew I needed to do that, right? That was the one thing that made everything fall into place, right? Because sometimes it's one thing that makes everything fall into place. Me leaving my job made my business fall into place, my family, having more time with my son, more time with my husband, and more time for me to sit back and figure out what I really wanted. So number 1, finding the one thing. Second thing is using what you have, right? Like sometimes I think there's a book that says that don't focus on the gap, focus on the gain or something like that. And many people are so focused on the gap from where they are to where they want to be, or the gap from what they have to the gap for what they want to have, that they don't recognize what they've already gained and what they already know and what they already have. And I'll give one quick example. When the pandemic happened, we have 3 bedrooms, my son's room, our room, and then we had a guest bedroom. And my office I had set up in the living room. My husband was in the basement, and I was frustrated. Like, I need an office. We need a new house. And I'm like, and he's like, wait a minute. We need a new house because you need a new office. He's like, we have a spare bedroom upstairs. Why aren't you using that? And I was like, well, that's the guest room and somebody might come. And he's like, when's the last time we had a guest? And I couldn't even think of the last time we had a guest. So needless to say, we turned the guest room, which I'm in now, into my office. And that was 2 years ago, and no one has visited yet, right? And so sometimes you just use what you have. We want something else, but use what you have. And then the third thing is do something. So even if you don't take a big step, little steps in the right direction will get you to where you're going. Small steps also in the wrong direction will take you further away. And so do something that gets you closer to what you want. So the first thing is for you to find the one thing, right, that you need to do. Identify that. The second thing is to use what you have. And the third thing is to do something that gets you closer to whatever it is that you want. And it may not be a leap. It may just be a step, but get closer.
That's it. I like that. As you look at this next chapter of your professional life, right? What type of impact are you hoping to have?
So I'm going to have a big impact. My change management methodology, the Barefoot method, is going to be used by leaders everywhere around the world. There will be people certified in it. There will be people who use it at their companies as leaders, and also consultants who are licensed to use it eventually. Also, I will eventually open up a entrepreneurial incubator where people can be trained in my methodology, but also get funding to help support entrepreneurs. And so that's longer term, and having time away allows you to think about the big picture, and it's not just for me. I want to help. Again, it goes back to the same theme that I talked about earlier. I want to help people not just identify their dreams, but achieve their dreams. Because if I can start from being homeless and a foster child and get where I am today, I think anybody can achieve whatever it is that they want.
No, I love that. I love that. So, Shara, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I appreciate, one, you joining the show. I loved hearing your story, seeing your creativity with the video on LinkedIn. And I got to mention, a huge shout out goes to Jennifer Walton from episode 4. She was the one who actually shared your story with me. And what's great about this is, you interview guests, and now all she does, she just tagged me in the comments. And then I was like, oh, what is this? Saw the video. So huge shout out to Jennifer Walton from episode 4. Shara, I'd love for us to also stay connected, but would love for you to share where our listeners can support you.
Yes. So you can find me on any of the social media platforms under my name, Shara Hutchinson. I imagine, Brian, you'll probably have some sort of link there. And if you're interested in any leadership training, consulting, or keynote speaking, you can also visit my website at www.xposeyoursolutions.com, which I imagine there'll be a link as well to both my company and my book, Barefoot in the Boardroom.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. That'll do it for today's episode. Again, I want to thank my guest, Shara Hutchinson, for joining us today. As we mentioned, I'll be sure to share all of her information in our show notes. So look, I hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Shara.
Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to Why I Left. Be sure to join us next time for more stories from the Great Resignation. Visit us at www.whyileft.co. That's whyileft.co. And subscribe to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.